What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to Shooting the Shit Uncensored. You know who it is right here. It's the dad bod god, the bald, the beard, and the fucking beautiful Piers Austin. And tonight, my guest is returning, and I'm so glad to have this guest on. KrackerJak is a pro wrestling legend here in Australia. He's a veteran. He's been around for a long time. He's toured the world. He's had some amazing experiences, and I'm really glad to have him on for the second time. The first time was so much fun. It was like, I think it went like an hour and a half, and I was actually just talking to KrackerJak, and I said that the last time we spoke on this show was the 21st of October, 2021. So it's almost a year to the date. So I'm really excited to have him on for the second time and on the 1 year reunion. I don't know what you want to call it. But before we get into that, let's take a quick second to thank one of our amazing sponsors and help keep the lights up going up in this bitch. First up is healthvape.com. Healthvape is your healthy vaping alternative. All of their products, no nicotine, no addictive or harmful chemicals. They help restore your energy while giving you the vital boost you need to get through your day. And they are vitamin infused. So go and check out healthvape.com. Use promo code MWAPOD to get a 10% discount on your final purchase. Also, wherever you're finding us, whether it's YouTube, Twitch, or any podcast platform, please give this a like, share, a 5-star review. We appreciate it. It goes a long way, and it helps us bring more amazing content to more amazing people. So please help a brother out. Like, share, subscribe. But ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and everyone in the world, tonight, let's get ready for my one-on-one conversation with the mad bastard KrackerJak. Boom! And we're live with the Australian Wrestling Legend. Welcome back.
Yes, it's been a while. Sorry, I should have done more push-ups just off camera before we kicked off. I'm sorry. I should have fucking tanned before this. So I apologize for everyone for letting them down for not being tanned enough.
Not at all. Not at all. We appreciate you joining us. Dude, as I said, it's been a year, almost a year since we last had you on the show. And a year you've had, you've made your return to in-ring action. Finally. Brother Gore is, heavyweight champ over at DMDU. And, you've had some pretty amazing matches as well since you've come back. Almost like I'd say some dream matches in some regard as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I've only had like 6 matches since finally overturning my retirement at the start of the year and get my Legends contract back. And I've tried to make them count. So, as I enter into I'll probably call it the third phase of my career, I'm kind of leaning into quality over quantity, which I certainly wouldn't say about the first act. At least that was a lot of shit I should have said no to, but I rolled along with it because I just couldn't say no to a terrible booking in the middle of nowhere in front of no one. But I'm really trying to make them count for this final run because my arms and legs could fall off and my spine could just snake out of my asshole at a moment's notice. So I got to make the most of it while I can.
Oh, absolutely. And do you think for yourself, like now you're going to be very, like, as you were saying, like a little bit more selective on what you're going to be doing as far as matches? You are known for some of the most, brutal, bloodiest matches that we've seen here in Australia, and also, the matches you've had in Japan as well. Are you going to be, dabbling back in that sort of style of wrestling, or are you just going to be sticking to more of like the hybrid base sort of style?
Look, firstly, I mean, I think the matches I had in Japan were really more just your sort of standard tag matches. I didn't do any hardcore there. I mean, I was working for BJW, so there's like so much tube glass infused into the ringside mats that all you need to do is get knocked down on the floor and you get cut open. But no, they were more, hey, it's all the Australians who turned up on our doorstep crammed into the one match. So that wasn't, no, everything I did that was considered hardcore happened outside of the ring while I was drunkenly stumbling around the streets of Tokyo. Yeah, so I mean, I've had like two what I would consider sort of hardcore deathmatchy type matches since coming back. And I've been like deep in the Wrestle Rock business since they returned a couple of years ago. And as sheriff of Wrestle Rock, even while not wrestling for the last 7 shows, I still managed to get busted open on every single one. I mean, the hardcore needle has moved quite a bit in this country in the past year or so, with Deathmatch Down Under being launched and taking off. And I wouldn't say normalizing deathmatch, but there's certainly a lot more of it around, especially sort of at the gussety, light tubey end of the scale, compared to when it was really like Mad Dog and I. It was like Chucky before us, Jag Lobo, obviously, but there wasn't a shitload of it. And now there's there's like a whole deathmatch tournament like in 2 weeks, next week. So that's all changed quite a bit, and honestly, it's not something I've really waded into. Like I work for Deathmatch Down Under. I manage my brother, the mighty Snuff King Gore, as heavyweight champion, but I haven't really done any of the hardcore there because I think there's not a need for me to be part of that. You've got guys like, Callan, Canby, Bateman, Mad Dog, always Mad Dog. A lot of people sort of engaging in that sort of thing. And I feel like, if I started getting involved, I'd be like a drop in the blood ocean comparatively. I've always been, I always like the hyper violent stuff, always, ever since I was 5 and I saw all the Nazis melt at the end of Indiana Jones. I'm like, fuck yeah, graphic violence. But in my career, I've always been about, well, what's everyone doing? I will do something to the left of that. And there's so much deathmatch now that, I think it's sort of a crowded environment that I wouldn't be necessarily contributing to. So the only hardcore I've done in terms of like deathmatchy type stuff I've done at shows away from Deathmatch Down Under, where no one else is really doing that sort of thing. So I had my hardcore match with Lockie Hendricks at Wrestle Rock, which finally put like a 6.5-year-old story to bed that I never thought I'd get a chance to conclude. And that was certainly violent. And then, just a few weeks ago, Robbie Eagles and I maimed each other at Renegade on the show that just went up on Fight a couple of days ago. And I think that was probably a little more violent than anyone was expecting, including Robert and I. And so I feel like I can do interesting things in that space. But as far as sort of the pioneers of deathmatch, that's in other people's hands now, and they are welcome to it.
Yeah. But I think from what I'm gathering from that is like you like to be something different, and doing the deathmatch sort of style, or going in and doing death matches in DMD, you would just be, I don't know, like, am I right in saying this? You feel like you'd be just
better than everyone else. Don't get me wrong. I'd still be better than everyone else. But it's contrary, I think. I think back when, I started doing it, it was like Mad Dog was all, no one else wants to do this stuff with me, drags me into his violent little world. And then I got a taste of it. But because I'm a like contrary little bitch, I'm like, well, I don't want to do it if everyone's doing it. It won't make me special. And I've always gotten much more fun out of like long form storytelling and character twists and turns and making people laugh and then mortifying them with something tragic. And obviously my deep, deep, deep love for tag wrestling. And you can do all of those things and bleed everywhere and stab motherfuckers and stuff. I'm still interested in doing that. But yeah, it's, you know, if I look at the needs of our scene at the moment, the needs for ultra violence are being met.
Yeah.
And I don't want to, pull attention from the people who are sort of, you know, getting into a more experimental phase in their career with hardcore and deathmatch paraphernalia, but also I got to look at what's going to be sort of interesting and different for me.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And do you feel like, because I feel like now Deathmatch Down Under, when they launched, they've had such success with their shows, and I think it was kind of like a missing piece for Australian wrestling, was that deathmatch thing where you could go and there is a show which would have, you know, death matches on every single show, and it's, you know what I mean, like there's no confusion on what DMDU is because it's in the name as well, and that's something that I was, you know what I mean, like.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they always kind of wanted to be a bit of that combo show, you know, a bit like your classic ECW, where we associate them for like the barbed wire, funk sabu type shit. But they had, you know, amazing luchadors and comedy and stuff like that, and salacious content. They were a mixed bag, but everything was at the bleeding edge of what they could get away with. Yeah, and I think it is sort of, it's like, I wouldn't call it violence for violence sake, because I think that would be sort of a reductive thing to say about them. But certainly, you know, the violence is the point. Whereas I think I've sort of come partly, and it's so important to me not to sound like a fucking old head when I start talking about this sort of back in my day it meant something and shit. When they're doing things far more violent than I ever did, and fuck yeah to that. But I've always liked, I guess in comedy, I like violence for violence sake. And for wrestling, I don't mind it, but usually I prefer it when it's like the rivalry between two wrestlers is so great that a standard match won't contain the expression of animosity that they're prepared to engage in. And like, if you think about it, you know, in a normal match, why would I needlessly expose myself to potentially career-ending injuries and stuff?
Yeah.
Like, if I could just win normally. But if I fucking hate a guy, if I hate them so much that I don't care what happens to me in the pursuit of harming them, then it makes sense for me to get into a situation that's ultra violent. I'm willing to take that risk because I hate them, or the stakes are high. I don't give a fuck. And that's why I would like to get in. And that's what I kind of did with Lockie and with Robbie Eagles. And I just think my skill set sits better in the sort of the long form storytelling and interesting character stuff. I can't match Callan Butcher's willingness to roll around in glass. He wants it more than me, and he can fucking have it. But if someone pushes my buttons to the point where I see no other way than to set fire to myself and then give them a bear hug, then I'm willing to look at it.
And that's the thing that I really enjoy about, you know, it's like seeing you perform, and like, you know, seeing your promos and everything like that. They are so good, so entertaining, and it's like sitting there and seeing a KrackerJak promo. Like, I just sit there and go, this guy is just like, gets every aspect of his character and what he's trying to achieve right now. And that to me is like seeing there and sit there. And you see that like on a lot of international level as well, on shows where like there's performers who just, they might not understand the character, and the believability in what they're delivering might not necessarily come about, whether that's like they're still trying to figure out who their character is, or they don't get the gimmick that they've been given. But I find with your character, it's always, you know, you understand the situation that you were in, like, and the crowd that you're in front of, and react as you need to, but also the promo that you deliver is always on point and always grabs the attention of the audience.
Yes, I think back when I started out, like 22 years ago, it was all quite shticky and stuff. It was like gags, you know, it's that hook of if you can make them laugh, you've got their attention, and then maybe you can take them elsewhere. And I always tried to approach it like, you know, an actor, like, you know, what if this was real? How would I respond in this situation? And try to take it that way. I think ever since I started teaching that side of the business, I think that's made sort of a huge difference to what I can do. I think I spend so much time helping other people with their characters, being like, well, why would you say this? What matters? Does this matter more, or does this matter more? What are your hierarchy of values? What does your guy want more than anything else? And then, act in a way that honors those motivations and stuff. And I think I've spent so much time in that I particularly noticed, like, I feel I did really good work before retirement, but I really noticed when we came out of lockdown, I'd done so much teaching online, like one-on-one and in groups, helping people with character and promo and that sort of shit, that I think, that first promo I cut when we came out of lockdown, I cut one at DMDU that was just like the most searing, venomous, fuck this place promo. And you've done good when a whole bunch of people are like, dude, that was fucking rad. I agree entirely. I'm like, I was working. Yeah, I wouldn't take money from them if I hated it and stuff. Some people did, yeah. But, I made a point of operating in that space where I really like a shoot interview where, you've got that thread of truth, but to me, it's really important that's got to lie underneath a line of pure universal kayfabe, that anyone who's just consuming it based solely on the text, they don't have any sort of prior knowledge, they don't know what's going on Twitter, they don't read dirt sheets or whatever the equivalent is now. They can just take the text as read and go, I understand. But underneath, like an Easter egg for people who know more, they can go, oh, fuck, that means something more because on this day this happened and here's that relationship with that. That's the interesting space I like to operate on. So I do like to keep a shooty thread where I can, but I think if it's all shoot and there's no like kayfabe veneer for those who aren't in the know, that to me is an indulgent space to work in, and I try to avoid that. But I came back. That one was killer. And then the one I did for MCW Homecoming, where I kind of declared my intention to return to wrestling now that lockdowns were over. I think I nailed those two, and I'm like, fuck, I'm better than I was. I think I've got a better sense of measure, a better sense of making every moment in a promo count, and kind of like a better understanding of how to connect, get those ideas across, cut out the clutter, and do something that makes people go, fuck, that was a thing.
Yeah. And I think that as you mentioned earlier, it's kind of like, a roller coaster of emotion that you can sort of take people on. And I think when you can have a character, much like yourself, who can be funny when it's needed, be pissed off and angry when it's needed, you know what I mean? Be violent or whatever, you know what I mean? Can go through that and be believable in each one of those emotions. I think that's what really sort of grabs people and takes it on that emotional roller coaster, which I think, personally, that's what wrestling should always do to the audience.
Yeah, it should move you in some capacity, I think. I mean, I don't like to run down spectacle. Like, I know there's sort of a lot of discourse in some circles now about, the moves don't matter. And I understand what people say when they say the moves don't matter, but I don't know any wrestling fan who didn't go, that was a cool move. I fucking love this move. Like, the moves do matter too. I don't want to sort of take away from wrestling's value as just like car crash shock entertainment and stuff like that. But I think if you can make people care, you do get more out of it, especially in the long term. It's like a deeper satisfaction, like a proper healthy meal rather than just junk food or something. And you can make them laugh. That's pretty easy and stuff. And some people fall into that space where they just hover around the safety of pop in the room with laughter. Making them angry is pretty straightforward. But I think if you can make them care or make them feel sad, make them long for something, to me, that's like the really interesting space to operate in. And I don't know that we do enough of it in the indies. I think we've got audiences now, and I especially felt this a couple of years ago coming into lockdown. In the indies, audiences are kind of more willing to believe than ever before. Like, they know it's a work and they know it's a show, but they're willing to put that aside and be like, get on board with it. And I think that kind of opens us up to do more interesting storytelling, because I think for a long time we were like, what we do kind of dies under the light. We're trying to tell a story that moves people, but then it's in like a bingo hall with house lights and shit. And so it suffers a bit. Whereas now I think a lot of the production's a lot better as well. We've got better tools technologically to kind of tell stories. I think there's a better culture of fandom who are into indie wrestling. And it's not like it's the WWE and then it's the indies. They're like, it's a different environment. We're more interested in this kind of art house fringe thing, and we're willing to give it a chance. And I don't think we need to kind of apologize for our craft as much anymore. And that opens us up to be able to tell stories that do move people, and fans will buy in on them if we do it right and if we honor and reward them for paying attention.
Well, then, wrestling in front of those audiences, wrestlers have a chance to go out there and really work. And because I think when wrestling is in front of an audience where it's not in front of a wrestling. Yeah, I mean, they're not regular wrestling fans. They just sort of stumbled in and found, or whatever it may be. I think, those, you can't put on the same matches that you're going to put on in front of like a hardcore bunch of wrestling. You know what I mean? Like an 18, 20-minute like chain wrestling match could have doing it. But if it's in front of like a non-wrestling fan crowd, which surprisingly enough, I have seen big crowds that aren't necessarily wrestling fans at shows, but they're for the experience, they may get lost in that. Would you agree or disagree?
Yeah, you've got to look at sort of what brought them into the building. And there's obviously a huge difference from, again, like an MCW show where you've got like 450, 500 people who were here last month and the month before. There's a sense of continuity. They're there for a spectacle and a fun show, but they're also there because they enjoy watching, 20 minutes of, Brooks and Slex doing their fucking thing at the very height of what Aussie wrestling can be physically at the moment. They're down for that. Whereas, you can't necessarily take something that's going to, set a room full of diehard wrestling fans on fire and put it in front of a bunch of casuals that they won't be literate in a way that allows them to enjoy it to the same level. I mean, it could still happen, obviously. I mean, you remember when we didn't have Foxtel carrying the wrestling in Australia and we all had to go to the fucking cinema to watch pay-per-views? Yeah. And it was so weird because I was so used to watching it in my lounge room drunk as fuck, and then I had to sit in the goddamn Village Cinema incredibly sober and try to enjoy these sort of post-attitude pay-per-views. Although I once did take a long string full of balloons filled with laughing gas, and that sort of got me through a WrestleMania very easily. They're like, what are they? They're my balloons. I'm taking them to the wrestling. But I remember I was there.
Sorry, go. No, I was just going to say. Go. No, you go.
I was watching the Royal Rumble that had Chris Benoit versus Kurt Angle on it. And I remember they came out and, a bunch of casuals behind me are like, oh, boo, technical wrestling, lame. And then by the end of that match, the submissions were so well built that the whole room was on fire for it. And it was like, yeah, people, if you kind of educate them and ease them into it, they can light it up for technical wrestling and that sort of stuff. But you've got to kind of bring them along. And if you just sort of plonk that in front of a bunch of drunk people who were just there to yell and have a good time and boo the heels, you're not necessarily going to give them what they came in the room for.
No, absolutely. And I was just saying, I remember the open cinema day, like the cinema days of pay-per-views where you had to go to the movies to see it. I actually wrote my car off on the way to go to the movies to watch a WrestleMania. And I had two of my friends in the car and we pulled over and we're around the corner from a friend's house and they go, well, man, what do you want to do? Like, are you pretty shaken up? I go, yeah, fuck it. Let's get the car back to your house. We'll go in your car and let's go watch WrestleMania.
Yeah, that was kind of cool though to watch it in a big cinema with like 400 or 500 people. Like, I'm not flying myself over to WrestleMania. I got 500 things to spend my money on. But it was kind of like cool to see it in that environment.
Yeah, it definitely was. I'm glad it went back to pay-per-view so, KrackerJak could be drunk as fuck in his lounge.
Yeah. I mean, I don't need to be drunk to enjoy wrestling, but I do think it helps with the immersion. So that's like a bit of a difference.
Oh, exactly, man. But one of the, when I promoted this interview, a few people wanted me to ask you about your match you had with Necro Butcher.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, so what was your, Necro Butcher, absolute legend in the deathmatch scene, and one of the toughest fucking people, and put himself through some hellacious matches. Yeah. Also, a very highly intelligent dude. How did you find working with Necro?
It was really fun. I think I wasn't even meant to be in that match, so it was meant to be Homicide versus Necro for NHPW in Perth. And I think for some reason, Homicide couldn't get into the country. Maybe he has Homicide written on his passport and they went, no. But he couldn't. I think he has been in at least before or since. But yeah, he sort of cancelled on short notice. And Mana, the guy who was running NHPW, was like, who do I find? And I'd wrestled him for one of the World Series Wrestling International Assault shows about a year or so earlier when sort of he was on the way out physically. And I really delivered for him. And now I kind of feel that I'm sort of not where I was at physically. I identify a bit, but I think I really sort of went out of my way to give him what he needed, and he recognized and appreciated that. And so he wanted to sort of make it up to me. And then when this sort of opportunity to wrestle Necro came along, he reached out to me. Do I want to wrestle Necro Butcher? And I think it was one of those bookings where you sort of go, fuck, do I? Do I really want to wrestle Necro Butcher? Or is that a terrible fucking idea? And I went through the whole process again a couple of months later when he's like, do you want to wrestle low key? And I'm like, do I want to wrestle low key? But yeah, I said yes to it. And it was kind of cool because I think he's a really interesting artist and he's a philosophical guy. And I think he's, we don't talk about wrestlers as artists very often, but I think, he's definitely not often enough, frankly, and he's definitely one. And he's like an outsider artist. He's like a mad dog in many ways, in that he has a really interesting sort of philosophy and a way to approach wrestling and stuff. And yeah, physically tough as shit. But it was cool. I learned a whole shitload wrestling him. I think it was like the most I think I'd ever bled in a match. Like, and he walloped the shit out of me. His hands are like fucking hubcaps and calloused as fuck and stuff. And I came out maimed. But I had a really good time, and we like kind of connected and hit it off and stuff like that. And it put some of my experience as a wrestler, especially one who does hardcore, in like a broader international context. Because, when you're the hardcore guy and you travel and you go elsewhere, you don't always get put with the best wrestler. Sometimes you just get booked with the guy who doesn't give a fuck. And I absolutely give a fuck. Like, I'll put my body on the line for my art. I mean, it's according to most medical professionals, I'm a fucking idiot for coming back to wrestling. Terrible idea. I got out alive and I'm a moron for coming back with some of the long-term issues I've got. But I did anyway. But I still give a fuck, But when you're the hardcore guy, you get put with the guy who's not necessarily a good wrestler, even a safe wrestler. He's just the guy who's willing to get stabbed.
Have you ever you've obviously had to be in that situation, but have you ever gone into a situation like that, seen someone and just gone, nah. I'm not doing this?
No, but I mean, I usually know who I'm working before I get on the plane, right? So it's not like I'm going to turn up and then I find out that, Necro's not here, but we've got some guy who doesn't give a fuck, who's willing to be stabbed. Get in the ring with him. I'm like, no, I'm not putting my body in that guy's hands. But Necro was clearly so used to that. Like, he'd just come back from some shows where he'd been in the ring with guys who weren't necessarily like, it sounds awfully not hardcore to say this, but like safety wasn't a prerogative for those guys. And so he's come in. He doesn't know me from shit. I said, no one, he didn't know me. He turns up, I'm covered in scars and stuff. It could mean that I'm some backyard garbage piece of shit. And as we're putting the match together, I remember he was explaining the finish and he starts talking about, he's like, I'll have you up on the top rope. And then, you push my head down and you slide over and I'll hold on. I'm like, dude, are you describing a sunset bomb? He's like, yes, I am. I'm like, dude, you know how to work, right? And he's like, oh, thank Christ. It was such a load off because you didn't know, and you just don't in those situations. Like, you turn up to a wrestling show and you're booked with a guy who's in awesome shape, they have great gear, and they don't say anything fucking stupid while you're sort of talking about what you're going to do. You relax. Whether you know Mitch Waterman or not, if you turn up and you meet him and he's like respectful and intelligent and looks good and has good gear, you assume he's a professional. But with hardcore, it kind of opens it up a bit because there's a greater diversity of body types, and it's in no way an indication of whether you're safe or not, but it can make it kind of a crapshoot. And it means in the wake of that, when I've had hardcore matches with other internationals, I've kept that in mind. Like when I got to work with Hardcore Holly, which is a huge pop for me. I've always been a Holly fan. I was very much, it was one of those things where he wasn't really up to speed on that it was going to be a street fight. And I'm like, Mr. Holly, sir, do you mind, we'll, just so you know, I'm not interested in doing anything you're not comfortable with. It's of paramount importance that you move on from here safe and can work again tomorrow. He's like, okay, cool. He was a bit standoffish. And then some ring crew guy goes, hey, Crackers, we got the barbed wire chair for you. I'm like, I didn't ask for it. I'm like, get the fuck out of here. It's just like, we're using that. Last thing I wanted is an angry Bob Harley before I wrestle him. And it was the same when I worked with Tommy Dreamer as well. I'm like, just to understand, I want to make sure this operates within whatever space you're comfortable in. In my experience with internationals, they want to have a great match. More than anything, they want to get home safe and then be able to go out on the road and earn more money and stuff. And so what I kind of took away from the Necro match is the guys who kind of have an international rep for being hardcore deathmatch wrestlers, they do often find themselves in the ring with guys who are not as professional and safe and have an interesting longevity of career that they do. And so something I kind of make a point of is making sure that they know they're not in the hands of someone who's going to take liberties or be a dumb cunt.
Yeah. Do you think that like that has changed though, like over the years? Because like now, like I don't know if you watch a lot of like violent matches or death matches or whatever you want to call it, but like now it seems to be like some really good workers that are in the deathmatch scene, and they do it really, really well. Like internationally, like Alex Cologne, Tremont, you know, Necro Butcher, for example, Schlack, they actually can put on amazing match. Even Nick Gage as well, chuck in there, put
Yeah,
on
absolutely. Yeah.
without the gimmicks, right? But when they bring it in, that's kind of like their element, what they're known for. But it's like they tell us, like, you know what I mean? They tell a story with it. It's not like, okay, let's get barbed wire. I'm going to gig you in the first second of the match. You're going to bleed all over. You know what I mean? Like there's always
Yeah. They try to do something interesting with it, or they just I think there's it's death matches kind of in a bit of it's hot right now, and people are. I mean, when fucking David Arquette decides to do a death match, it's kind of breaching the mainstream and stuff. So yeah, I think there are a lot of guys who, and there always have been. A lot of I mean, again, like if fucking Terry Funk is getting in death match and he's the greatest of all time, then it's there's nothing that says great wrestlers can't get involved in deathmatch. There's lots of magnificent wrestlers who do deathmatch in Australia and around the world and stuff. I think it is more popular than ever, and that more and more people are sort of being like, maybe I can have a go, and that's kind of opened it up. I guess from a sort of looking at the kind of like the branding of deathmatch, I guess in terms of how the audience understands the type of wrestler who'd get involved in that, the more people who do it, I would argue, the less special or unique it sounds. It's like, it's pretty wild when Snooker came off the top of the cage in Madison Square Garden. But if everyone starts jumping off the top of the cage in Madison Square Garden because they figure out, oh, it's just a work, you just break fall and you're fine, it makes it less special and stuff, which is another reason why I haven't jumped headlong into the deathmatch space here. I think, there's enough people doing it who really, really want to do it, and everyone else who does it makes each individual engaging in that space a little less special.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things because deathmatch wrestling kind of should be a spectacle, right? Because it's like, if it's like you said it earlier, if it's a payoff to a big feud or a blow off match that makes sense, then I mean, like two people that hate each other just going at it that like a regular match won't do. So you have to incorporate gimmicks to accentuate and tell the story to another.
Yeah, it's the only way we can. Not that I don't think there's like the death match where it's about the death match rather than about the individuals and the rivalries. I think there's a space for that too, and whether or not it sits within my tastes, if fans want to pay to watch it, then it's okay. I certainly don't want to be like, oh, it has to be a big fucking character wank and a blow off to a story and all that sort of stuff. It can just be, hey, let's fight. Them's fighting words. And next thing you know, they're throwing rocks at each other's faces. That's cool too. I like to see clips from some ring set up in a paddock in the States where dudes are backing over each other with cars as much as anything else. I don't want to do it, but I'm like, fuck, that's like, it's something. Like it's not necessarily what the old timers of wrestling 100 years ago envisioned for our sport, but it's like fucking something. And if you're into that, go wild. I'm not going to yuck on someone's yum in the bedroom or in the ring. So if that's what you want to do, then they are more than happy to do that.
Have you seen the Russians? I was just going to say, have you seen the Russians? How their death matches? They look like I've seen some clips, and they literally looks like it's in someone's backyard. Someone's laid some mats down, put in like some wooden like spikes into the ground, wrapped barbed wire around it. There's like 20 people, and these people are doing some of the most like insane shit. Like I just watch it go, wow. Do you feel like it can be taken too far?
Well, I mean, if the individuals are fine with what goes on, then they're fine with what goes on to them. I remember Necro copped a bunch of heat because he wanted someone to cut one of his toes off in a match. I remember hearing about that and going, well, that's insane, but also it's pretty fucking rad. Well, like, come on, man, you watch a wrestling match and a cunt gets his toes cut off? When he comes back for vengeance, there'll be hell to pay. So, I don't know about too far, and I think the idea of stakes in the ground, I think, does open up the sort of the idea of the no ring death match, or some of the sort of the underground wrestling that Fugo runs in Japan, where it's like the sort of the mat and the chains set up and stuff like, I mean, I think as an art form, wrestling's got the space to flex into those directions. My preference is the quasi edging on an adults only show, but still technically for all ages, that's meant to be sort of long form storytelling in traditional North American style, but with wiggle room to go into interesting, emotional or violent places. That's sort of my wheelhouse when I have a choice. But I absolutely see the appeal in paying to go see that amazing sounding Star Picket mattress ring and stuff like that. And if the performers are comfortable with it, then to me, it's not too far. And I guess the other too far to consider, which is something that people kind of throw out when they criticize deathmatch, is its potential to harm the broader industry, which I think is like kind of a different conversation. And, admittedly, if I set up a ring in my garden and run a show and someone dies and then someone else dies and then my homemade ring falls over and crushes some children I let come watch, I could imagine that could make me do harm to the rest of the scene when people are like, oh, you're going to see a wrestling show. Like, oh, you're going to go see PCW. Is that where the ring fell over and killed the child? And you'd be like, no, it's totally different. Unlike other art forms, one kind of represents all in wrestling. Like if you go see a comedian on the weekend and he eats shit, you're not going to be like, all comedy in Australia is terrible. But I think if a casual fan goes and sees a shit wrestling show and it's dog shit, it can turn them off all of wrestling. So there is kind of like an argument for that. But I would say, never mind the death match, nothing is going to shift a local punter's perception of what wrestling is more than what comes from the top. And that's WWE. And I think that to me is going to dictate more how people feel about wrestling than anything else. Like it doesn't matter if we're putting on, the very greatest technical sports entertainment matches of, the fucking peak of AWA. If the WWE is putting out trash, that will be what the general punter thinks wrestling is. We have always been, as an industry, as a cottage industry, subservient to the tone they set.
Yeah. And I think as well, like there's always been like kind of like ebbs and flows with wrestling, like when wrestling's cool and when wrestling's like, it's not that really cool anymore. Like people sort of lose interest or whatever. And then it picks back up again. Oh, it's cool again.
Yeah. And are the normies interested, or is it just the people who really like what wrestling is in some capacity?
Yeah. And, I think as well, like, and when I had Jay Stevens on, we spoke about like, tribalism in wrestling, how like, you're fans of one promotion over here and fans of another promotion over there. Oh, our promotion is better. Yours sucks. Well, no, they're both.
Yeah. Look what you guys did at AEW, you shit munchers. That's sort of, there's that kind of thing. You see it all the time in the way people like fervently defend their own brand to others. And I'm sure that happens on a local level as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's almost like there can be a pack mentality when it comes to it. I think, when it's like, but sometimes it can be a toxic place. The comment section on social media.
I mean, sort of, I see it happening in the big leagues. Like people are all like, fuck WWE, I only like New Japan. So New Japan, are you like the tourist feds, do you? And stuff. But like, I think at a local level, I don't think the fans give a fuck. Like, I don't know that there are a lot of people who are like, I'm like BCW and nothing else. I don't think that's, especially because so much of the talent is shared across. I think, people find a company that kind of caters to the type of show they like, or they follow wrestlers they like, or it's strictly geographical. I go to my local wrestling. I mean, for fucking 20 years, 15 years, I wrestled at the Dragonfly restaurant. The company running it must have changed at least 3 or 4 times. I knew some fans who were it's just wrestling in this Chinese restaurant. And they didn't even pay attention to the 3-letter acronym at the top of the poster. It's just the wrestling at the venue and stuff. And they don't have that sort of allegiance. I'd say, the only real tribalism between promotions at kind of like an indie level in this country is between the promoters. I think most of the talent don't give a fuck. They're like, I want to wrestle as much as possible. No one promotion will let me wrestle twice a week or 3 times a week and pay me enough that I don't need to, grift on the side. we want them all to succeed.
Yeah.
If you've got a particular interest in one promotion in some capacity, maybe you'd be a bit more tribal. But I think for most of them, we're just like, please just get along. Just run your shows on different dates. Just cooperate, because so many of us just want to work for all of you in front of as many fans as possible. And, you know, I think a bit of competition can be kind of nice to make us all try to put on the best show possible. But for us as individual wrestlers, I think we're just looking for a platform to do our work. We want to, you know, do right by the people who pay us to perform and give them the best possible, you know, deal for their money as we can, and bring in as many fans as possible. But, you know, I don't think the idea of tribalism really applies much for talent to a great deal. I think for promoters, it's their business. So maybe, you know, they're more invested because their fucking house is on the line if the company tanks or whatever. But for us, we just want to work everywhere. We want them all to get along. And I think the fans are kind of like the same. I don't think the fans are really that tribal about it either locally.
No, I think like from what I see locally, like the Australian scene isn't really that toxic as far as like, you know what I mean? Because when I'm at shows, whether it's like if I'm interacting with people in the audience, whatever it is, you know, I'm always sort of seeing like you see a lot of the familiar faces that come and support every single show, which is fucking awesome, because it's what it is it's building a community of people in the scene where it's like, hey, you can come to us at a wrestling show. It's going to be safe for you. It's going to be cool for you. You're going to have a good fucking time. You're going to see the people that you like to see wrestle, and you're supporting another promotion as well. So, you know, I really see like Australian wrestling as being, you know, as far as like from a Sydney perspective, like from being a very open, friendly, welcoming place from all promotions, really.
Yeah, and anyone who buys tickets, if you take your money from your shitty life job and you spend it on us, I fucking love you. And if you do that to various promotions, I love you even more. If you go on the internet afterwards and you say, I really like this, I didn't like that, I like the other, you're fucking magic, and you should be worshipped, and we should hold you aloft as the people who really allow us to do what we do. I wouldn't go so far as to say there's no toxicity, but it's probably happening more behind the scenes rather than in the crowd and stuff. But yeah, fans just want to watch wrestling and shit and stuff. I don't give a fuck about the other stuff. It's got nothing to do with them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that like, I think you'll have the hardcore fans that sort of want to know the back sort of stage goss and stuff like that. But I think for the most part, they just want to go and detach from their normal lives, enjoy a good wrestling show, and be in that moment, be present, and enjoy what they want. And that's the thing. Like, I see a lot of people, like from a fan's perspective, like in the audience, that'll sort of, like, as you said earlier, will go into the kayfabe world and detach from reality. You know what I mean? Like, and that to me is an experience. It's like,
you push up from the edge and you just let it take you out there. Yeah, they really enjoy that. And it's always a real treat whenever, like, everyone who wrestles and has another job on the side has brought friends from work along and stuff. And it's like, you get one shot. Every wrestler can bring everyone they know to a show once. And then a very tiny percentage of them will actually like wrestling and stick around, and the rest will never come back and stuff. But it's always a real treat when you bring everyone from work and they watch wrestling for the first time and they're not fans, and they realize, like, I've had mates be like, I didn't realize I could, like, yell at the heels, because where else can you do that and not A, get punched in the mouth, B, be arrested, C, be, you know, dragged away? Like, no one else is going to tolerate you leaning over and going, fuck you, in someone's face. But at wrestling, they can. And I've had friends from work, like timid, regular folk, get in there, and a couple of matches in, they realize, I can really yell fuck you at this guy and he doesn't mind. That's his job. Fuck you. And they come back so alive and hyped because they've had such an awesome time. Just, you know, wrestling's really unique like that. You go to a gig and shout fuck you at the guy on stage, he's like, oh, what the shit? Stuff like that.
What the fuck, brother?
Yeah, I drove a long way to be here. But I think, you know, because when we're out there performing, it's like, you know, obviously it's us, but it's not really us. You know, like, no one who booed KrackerJak was really booing me. They didn't know me. They were booing the sort of the fictional construct I kind of put out there for their entertainment. I think that's pretty special. That's quite liberating, that you can sort of go and make that kind of noise and you interact with a wrestling show unlike any other form of art. like even regular sport, if you don't like the opponent's team, you're still being kind of an asshole if you shit canned them too savagely. Like they're just trying to win. But in wrestling, you've earned that by being the villain. You've earned their abuse, and it's kind of like a sign that you're doing a good job, so you don't begrudge it.
I was talking earlier today with Angel, who I do a podcast with, and I asked the question is what, and I'm going to ask you the same question is like, you look at wrestling as a form of entertainment, a form of the arts, right? So other forms of the arts and entertainment, movies, plays, TV series, whatever. For most part, people can sort of detach from, Al Pacino, the person, to Tony Montana, the character, right? They don't go up and go, man, you did way too much coke. You shouldn't have really.
What were you thinking?
Exactly. But like wrestling in this weird kind of bubble, people don't detach from it. Like a person could be a Nazi in a movie and people go, okay, that person isn't really a Nazi, but a pro wrestler couldn't do that gimmick in 2022. What do you think is like, how come there's no disconnect like there is for other entertainment, like there is for wrestling?
Okay, I spent a lot of time thinking about this, because this is the sort of shit you need to be able to articulate when you like pitch to arts festivals to get your wrestling on. They're not interested in it's going to be fucking rad. You got to be, wrestling lies orphaned at the intersection of sport and art, and neglected and rejected by both. And so you want to sort of phrase it a bit, kind of like a sort of theory. So I've spent a lot of time with this. I think partly the issue is wrestling spent so long pretending to be a sport, and unlike any other art form, our craft, they really tried to extend the fourth wall in perpetuity. Like anything else, you go see a play, and then at the end, everyone comes out and goes, "Wasn't this a great pretend?" And they bow. You see a movie and the credits roll. They're not, very occasionally they try to pretend to have two action stars get into it on the red carpet to make hype for their film or that sort of thing. But it's not really, and there are actually, there's quite a few examples of, musicians and filmmakers and actors and stuff trying to sort of work an angle from time to time. But generally, the art ends at the end of the performance. But wrestling was always like, no, real all the time and stuff. And we spent so long doing that I think when the majority of the industry lost interest in that facade, a lot of people were like, oh, so it's not a sport. I knew it and stuff. And they kind of rejected it, especially in such a sport-centric country like Australia. Like if we look at Australia, we're very big on our sporting heroes. We're not that big on our art heroes. And if we look at other things that Australia does in the arts that other countries do, we make films, but there's a barrier for a lot of people to going to see an Australian film. There's a barrier to listening to Australian music outside of Triple J's audience, unless it kind of gets overseas. We've got kind of like a cultural cringe that you don't see in other countries, where they're like, fuck yeah, this guy's American and we love our country, and so we're going to support our guy. With Australia, I think we love our sport heroes, but we're a bit sort of about our artists unless they're internationally accepted. So I think partly that's kind of what goes on with us, and we're not afforded the same extension. But at the same time, I think a lot of the art world and the entertainment world is a little reticent to embrace wrestling as well, because it's got a whole bunch of fucking baggage from pretending to be a sport, and all the times it's ridiculous and stupid and stuff like that. Like French philosophers were writing, essays about wrestling back in the 50s and how amazing an art form it is, but it still now it's more the cliche of it's a soap opera for men that people think they're reinventing every time they say it and stuff. But I do think, wrestling is kind of neglected by art and sport, and it kind of sits in the middle. And I think part of the consequence of that is, for the villains in wrestling, they're held to a different standard to villains in other media. Case in point, many years ago, when I won the MCW title from Carl O'Cannon about 7 years ago, he was being managed by Peyton Royce at the time. And so we did an angle. I was like the middling heel. And one show I speared her to get his attention and stuff. And my response to that in the wake of it, like as a sidebar, my understanding of face and heel is not so much, is this some sort of objective biblical morality? It's more, is everyone in the building going to think this is okay or not okay? People pretend they're tweeners. In my mind, if you say you're a tweener, you're just a face who's not very over, or a heel who's shit at his job. The audience should be able to form some sort of an opinion based on your actions as to whether they're into your shit or not. They think you're doing the right thing, leaving room for sort of moral ambiguity, obviously. And so everyone in the room, I speared Peyton Royce, and they went, "Wow, that was rad." And I'm like, "Oh, that's not the reaction I want." But the problem is the spectacle of that was so cool that people popped. And I'm like, I'm meant to be the villain here. I don't want people to pop for my shit like that. So in the match in which I beat Carlo for the title, instead I took a piece from one of my favorite pieces of sort of intergender violence in wrestling, which was This Tuesday in Texas from 1991, when Jake the Snake slaps Elizabeth. And it was stood out at the time. If you think of how sort of tame and PG WWE was in 92, it was like, whoa. And then Jake does this amazing promo about how nice it felt to slap Elizabeth. And it felt at a time like it was something that you get sort of about 7 or 8 years later in wrestling. He did it then. But I loved the cheapness of that slap. You got like a fucking 100-pound advantage here, and you do like the bitchiest, cheapest little thing. And so that's what I did to Peyton. And she was like totally cool with it, obviously.
Of course,
before you go out there. But it was sort of interesting in the wake of it. Some of the negative feedback the company got was, "You're glorifying domestic violence." And I was like, no, it was anything but glorious. But some people see representation as endorsement. And we see this in the other obvious art form that I think really struggles for mainstream acceptance is video games. And they have the same sort of thing. I remember one of David Cage's video games had a sequence of domestic violence in it, and your character like intervenes and put a stop to it. And people were like, "You shouldn't have that in games." And I'm like, no, this is like, it's condemned in context. They show you that it's bad. There's no ambiguity here. And it's like, you're not left wondering whether this is bad or not. They make it unequivocally clear that this is bad. And they had the same sort of pushback. "You shouldn't say this in a game." I'm like, well, no, it's an art form. It reflects the society we live in. We can show bad stuff in there. Maybe you should warn people up front, because no one wants their fucking traumas dug up when they're enjoying art. I don't think that's a problem at all. But I was really struck that they saw the representation of a cowardly man hurting a girl as some sort of glorification of it. And I'm like, what the fuck? Darth Vader killed his wife, and it's okay. And we mark out for him when he slaughters a bunch of rebels at the end of Rogue One. But a cowardly wrestler performs a cowardly act, and he's held to a different standard. Is this fucking fake or not? And stuff. And I think I don't subscribe to, you can't be a heel anymore because it's all PC and woke, any more than I subscribe to the belief that you can't be funny anymore in the modern age. But I think it's really weird that wrestling villains are held to a very weird standard that sometimes does make it hard to do our job, because you want to be reprehensible so that when the shit comes for you and you pay for your crimes, you've got it coming, and the face can really wail on you and the audience is satisfied that justice has been done. But we need to be villainous within some weird middle ground that isn't too bad, even though it's all a work. And I should be able to run around strangling orphans and get booed for it, and then the face saves the day. But I couldn't possibly, because that's too bad for wrestling and stuff. It's a really weird double standard, and I don't know that wrestling has kind of like effectively worked out a way to combat it or shift the public's perception of what we are and what the craft is.
I mean, do you think like you could go for like a risque angle in 2022 somewhere, and would a promotion be able to see it out if the story is being able to be told and be played out? Do you think that that's possible?
It depends on risque. I'm like, I kind of buy into controversial. I think is okay as long as you can. I mean, it depends what it is and how you can stand by it. I think it's important to look at whether you're, arguably doing harm in a broader context to individuals who watch or to society in general. I kind of buy into the George Carlin idea of, punch up, not down. And I think that's where wrestling's kind of got it wrong, particularly in the mainstream. People talk about how come there's not more gay representation in WWE. And I just think, how would you trust them with it? It hasn't been a great track record in terms of how they've kind of, represented the interests of minorities on the programming and stuff. They play it wide and broad, and, foreigner has equaled bad for a long time. And anything outside of the norm sexually has been presented as freakish and stuff. And so there's not a great precedent for engaging in that sort of space. I think you can tell all sorts of interesting stories, but you've got to look at, am I taking a giant shit on a vulnerable person? Is someone going to come along to the show and feel personally victimized because I've done a story that like kind of kicks down on their shit specifically? And it's a bit hard because, like I see, like, for example, anytime there's like an all women's wrestling show, there's always one wrestler guy who wants to be on it so they can come out and be all like super sexist, and they think they'll get booed. That's the idea and stuff. But half the time they go out and they get into that shit, and half the guys in the crowd are like, yeah, sandwich and shit. And you're like, we fucked this up. You expected boos, but you kind of counted on everyone being on the same page in the audience, and they're not. And now you've kind of given license to something ugly. So it's one of the things with sort of dealing with controversial matter is if it's so polarizing that everyone in the room has sort of like quite a different position on it, it's kind of hard to then tell a story that makes it very clear what's good and what's bad. Like even in the COVID context, it's like if you want to kind of definitely get cheered or definitely get booed, you've got to really know where the audience stands if you want to do a bit on vaccines or masks or something like that. Because you get a very different reaction where you are. And it's not like, if you work like a Juggalo show and you do a bit where you're a cop, you're going to get booed. Like it's pretty safe, right? And stuff. But I think some issues are maybe a bit more polarizing. I kind of, for example, when Gore and I came out and smashed the shit out of Kid Valiant at Deathmatch Down Under and used the Legends contract to take his belt, it was like we took a big old shit on Christmas, so to speak, in that moment. And I kind of did like a big sneering rant. And again, it sort of had shoot elements through it. And it was very important that I was coming from a place where I was working. I wasn't like directly criticizing how the company operated. But I think I sort of, I've got Gore standing next to me, this fucking specimen of jactitude and stuff. And I point down at Kid Valiant and I'm like, this is what happens when you build a roster on diversity instead of ability and stuff like that. And I kind of made a whole point of leaning into a grumpy old man attacking the values of that company in the context of the company. And I had a line where, you can, by all means, pursue your own identity, pursue your own truth, live your own life. But in this ring, there's one binary that is undeniable, and that is the weak and the strong. And I gestured to Gore. And I would never have done that at a show where I wasn't absolutely sure that the majority of the audience is wholly on board with Deathmatch Down Under's values. Because the last thing I want to do is say something like that and get cheered. I wanted to be sure I'd be a villain. And there aren't really a lot of serious villains at that company because the whole company is like, yay, deathmatch and stuff. And, hey, you, let's fight. Yay, and stuff. No one's really been but there's not a lot of real cuntiness there. So I kind of wanted to give them something to hate that stood against everything the company was about. That's what I've tried to do with Gore. But I certainly wouldn't do that sort of promo in front of a crowd where I thought anybody might be like, yeah, it's the last thing I'd want. Because imagine you're in that crowd and you're like non-binary or something. You feel like a piece of shit, like the whole show made you unwelcome and stuff. Yeah. Whereas I can do that and then be punished by the faces, and it kind of gives a sense of justice to the values of the company. So yes, you can deal with controversy. You just got to be fucking smart about it and consider the consequences.
Yeah, and I think as well as like playing it out and really understanding, okay, what you need to say and how you need to say it. And I think it comes in the delivery and also the choice of words. And I think the way that you put it out as the weak and the strong, you know what I mean? Like there's not going to be a personalized attack on that. You're just putting categories against each other and saying, well, weak here, strong here.
Yes, I invoked an idea, but then I took it to a place that was strictly kayfabe. And then I think is the safe space we can kind of play in. I think when you start shooting, you start fucking with, whether it's on an individual or a company or a social idea, that's when you're getting into dangerous territory and you want to be very certain of sort of where you stand. And, like something I put through my shit, whether it's a promo or a match or a moment, the two filters I kind of put it through are like, what if it was real? And how do I want people to react to it from a face heel perspective? Will everyone in the room be into this? If everyone in the room is going to be into it, then I'm a face. And it doesn't matter what I'm doing. If I'm in front of an audience that fucking hates babies and I start stomping on babies in Wellingtons, I'm a baby face. All right, I'm the baby stomping baby face. But most shows are going to boo that. But it's entirely relative to the audience. They've got their own understanding of what's good and what's bad. And for you to be a face or a heel, you kind of got to key into that. Otherwise, you get into the space where for years, I mean, look at WCW, they were pushing like squeaky clean Hulk Hogan in the era of the anti-hero, and no one wanted it and stuff until he came to the NWO and shit. That's their idea of what was good and bad was not the audience's idea of what's good and bad. And then they're coming back going, how come they're booing the face? It's because he's not a face to them, he's a heel.
But it's almost like, you look at like Bret Hart when he did his heel run.
Yes.
He did, you know what I mean?
Example.
Massive baby face in fucking Canada, in the US and everyone else. And all he did was state the truth. In Canada, we have free healthcare. In Canada, we take care of the elderly. You know what I mean? And that's what he was doing. But you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
Canada, and
his turn, he's so, I mean, all Bret Hart is awesome. I fucking love Bret Hart. But I think his heel turn I often use as like a teaching example when I'm doing promo class and character workshops and stuff, because it was such a good example of a guy, the character turns heel, but he retained his hierarchy of values. He didn't suddenly not value everything that was important to him, technical wrestling, respect for the business, sportsmanship. He just interpreted it in a way that the audience couldn't get on board anymore. He stayed true to himself. And it was really deft the way, and we got to give like both Vinces kind of credit with it as well. It was really deft how he managed to position himself as a heel, but stayed true to the character. Like sometimes to sort of turn heel, you got to be like, this is all what I believe in. I got to throw it all out and change my beliefs because I can't believe in kindness and be a heel. But he did a really good job of kind of retaining that and staying true to himself, but still being booed by the room.
It's amazing. Like I see now, like I don't see how that could, like I don't see a performer on that level in a WWE that could really take people on that roller coaster the same in the way that he did. Like I don't know if it's a societal thing. I don't know if people could sort of really. I don't know. I don't see how if one performer could get that reaction in WWE.
I don't know. I mean, like in fairness, I'm not as intimately familiar with the product as I was back then as well. So maybe there's like 19 guys who are perfect for it. I thought Mustafa Ali was kind of doing interesting things in a space for a bit there, because he's one of those guys who kind of, it's again, he's sort of very clear about what he stands for as a character. It's obviously in many ways what he stands for as a person. There was something kind of interesting with what he was doing with their kind of Antifa style stable and stuff, where it's like, those are the most interesting villains where they're, he's got a point, but it's like Magneto. Okay. I think Magneto is like the perfect guy in broader, fiction to sort of be like, well, he's not fucking wrong, but also probably shouldn't kill all the humans, and stuff like that. He's the villain. He's not wrong. He's just going about it the wrong way. So, I mean, maybe they've got a whole bunch of people who would be viable for that. And I guess we kind of got to see what the kind of the product is like when it's a little less Vince centric, because he's coming at this and booking this as a fucking mid-70s septuagenarian billionaire. He's kind of got different values to a lot of other people and stuff like that. So I'm not sure how that's going to change as well.
I'm actually like interested, like how they're now changing from being like a PG, like a kid friendly show to now being like TV 14. So like, I could just like imagine some parents who just sit there and go, oh yeah, our kids are just going to watch wrestling. Little Timmy's going to, who's 5 years old.
Hey man. Yeah.
They introduce Seth fucking Rollins. What the fuck? What was that? What?
Yeah. I viewed their move to sort of bump up the rating like somewhat skeptically. I think, and I'd apply that to local shows too. Often you see, as soon as it's 18 plus, it's almost like it goes so far in the other direction that it gets a bit sort of numb and excessive and witless and stuff. Not that there aren't plenty of great 18 plus shows in Australia, but to me, sometimes the really interesting space is when it's not 18 plus. And so you have a very clear barrier to kind of come up against. And the really interesting stuff can happen in that space right at the intersection between what's allowed and what's not.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of makes it interesting to work for companies like Renegade and MCW, because they're, ostensibly family shows that kind of push it a bit. And that's what made it really fun to, do the match with Robbie, where we kind of got into a space where it's like, we're on the edge of maybe not being family appropriate at all, but still kind of on the edge. And that space, to me, that's kind of exciting to operate in. And I don't know, like with WWE, I think it's sort of the most exciting moments for the last few years have kind of been where they've sort of pushed that envelope a bit. And you're like, oh, can they do this now? And now the line's been pushed further. I don't know that it will be sort of like it could just end up being trash TV again. Like, yay, yeah, sure, yay, Attitude Era. But you go back and watch a lot of it, and a lot of it is like pretty tasteless dreck. There's some amazing wrestling and some wonderful moments, but there's also some trash and some really mean-spirited downward punching stuff that sort of came with it. And once again, I'm like, I don't know, are they the company to kind of tell the world what wrestling can be in a mature format? Or will they go wide and broad again and it'll just be like more punching down on minorities? I don't know. I'm curious, but I'm tentative.
I feel like they're not going to go down the road of...
We're not going to get HLA again.
Yeah, no, I don't see we're going to see like... And you know what? I never understood evening gown matches, bra and whatever you want to put on them, because I remember as a teenager watching that and sitting there with my friends going, okay, so the whole premise of this match is like to strip someone up off against their will. That sets
already
off
pretty bad.
Fights, you know what I mean? Like,
that's it. I have done at least 2 bra and panties matches, but I lost them both. I felt that was appropriate. I guess my other thing with that is, when the WWE is really getting into kind of like pushing on the soft porn area and stuff, I'm like, I can get porn from porn, but I can't get wrestling from porn. And so it would be like, I don't mind Gaga, obviously. There's a thick band of Gaga that runs through all my shtick and stuff, and it's like it's one of the 4 pillars of wrestle rock. The other 3 being alcohol abuse, violence, and swearing. Gaga's fine, but I found that, I was like, you could have some of the best wrestlers in the world working for you now, and instead I'm watching like a jelly match with a couple of women in bikinis and stuff, I'm like, if I want to jerk off, there's an entire internet worth of shit to jerk off to, but you're the biggest wrestling company in the world. Give me high budget, top notch wrestling and stuff. And so that I think is the other issue, is when they diversify like that. Someone once said to me, wrestling takes everything in the world and makes it shit, which I thought was a bit harsh. But sometimes, like wrestling, when it tries to do comedy or when it tries to do eroticism, for want of a better word, it's a bit like music theater, something like that is like the worst of both worlds.
It's interesting, like, because like we're talking about the time and those sort of style of matches. Have you seen the documentary on Netflix that they did on Woodstock 99?
No.
So they did this documentary, and like it was a 3-part documentary, so 3 1-hour episodes. I sat down and watched it with my wife on a weekend, and I just went, this really goes to show that at the times, like that multiple women were sexually assaulted, raped at this show.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, like it was horrendous sort of shit that was in this documentary. And it's like, that was such a time of misogynistic behavior that we saw from people that was accepted. Social, like rape has never been accepted, but what I'm saying is, like, for someone to yell out, show your tits, you know what I mean? Like, that's some pretty creepy shit.
Yeah.
Like, you don't see people, no guy would, well, not many guys are going to go up to some random person they don't know, a female, and go, show your tit, you know what I mean? Like now, which I think we're in a better place, but it just showed like how poorly we really treated the fairer sex during that time, and probably before, like prior to that as well.
Anyone vulnerable, I think, has a shit time in that space. And it's kind of challenging because, the boundaries get looser. Anyone sort of around our age would probably remember back when sort of suddenly you could talk about sex on TV. Like I remember in the big 90s, like there's an actual show called Sex. Songs got racier. And it's stuff, and we saw it in wrestling too. Things got looser and looser and looser, and then people got too wild with it and stuff, and it went too far. But I think we always kind of see that, like everyone's like, oh, everything's so woke now, and I'm thinking it just sort of goes like this, and she gets too wild and shit, and then the center pulls back, and the center's always going to kowtow to the most mainstream tastes and stuff. If we think, like Woodstock 99 again, look at where WWE was going there in a year or so afterwards. It kind of, what was kind of cool about the Attitude Era, they kept trying to top it and take it further and further and stuff. And It's, you know, again, it's Pat Patterson pulling a fucking pad out of his evening gown and shit like that, and there's a stain on it and stuff. And it's like, oh, I don't know that I want to watch this. This is what I came for and shit. I don't know what the solution is. Let people go wild and then sort of wind it back and stuff like that. But yeah, I think like no one buys a ticket to have a bad time.
No.
I think is kind of like your takeaway there. And if people are buying tickets and having a bad time, something's gone wrong. And I think we can sort of bring it back to what we were saying before about how hard it is to be a heel. I think, you know, back in the day when more people kind of bought into what we did as real, you could kind of come out and you could authentically upset and hurt someone. And they'd be like, man, I can't believe that guy said that about me and my people. I will buy a ticket to see him get his head kicked in next month and stuff. Yeah. Whereas now they know they're all friends backstage. No one's going to be punished for this. You just insulted my culture, sexuality, identity, dad, for no reason. You won't suffer for it. You just did it to sell tickets and shit. And we're in that space now where that's something we need to consider with our heat. If we're going to be an art now and we're not a sport anymore and people know it's not real, you can't really antagonize people into the building anymore. Not really, not deep down cutting them to their core and what they believe in. And shit. Like if you come out there and you're like, women aren't people and they don't deserve to drive, a whole bunch of women aren't going to be like, what a dick, I will buy a ticket to see him get his comeuppance. Because no, I won't. It's a fucking story and shit. And so that's something we do have to kind of consider with our heat and what we kind of put out there. As people, they know it's a show now. There's no illusion anymore. Like maybe children, and when you go really far out from urban centers, a higher potential percentage of the audience think it's real. But generally, everyone's in on the rib now. They're in on the work, so you can't, you know, fundamentally devastate them and hurt their sense of what they stand for. They won't buy a ticket; they'll just take their money elsewhere.
I think heels now work a little bit smarter. Like if you can go and get get good heat.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like then you definitely, without overly insulting the audience, and there's like heat from the crowd, and then there's the guttural groan of like, oh God. You know what I mean? Like if you can go and get that real heat where like people boo you, and there's performers out there that can do it and do it very, very well, and they don't necessarily have to swear or do any of that or anything that's really, yeah, they could do it on a G-rated show or they could do it on an R-rated show, either way, and they don't have to push those boundaries or go to that level, because, you know, I think it makes people, you know, rise up, and you see talent, you know, evolve to the society that they're in, going, okay, well, what's acceptable? I'm still going to get my fucking heat. I'm going to be able to go out there and do this. Perfect. Go out and do, you know what I mean? Like without sort of having someone leave there and go, oh fuck, like that.
Yeah, you can make them angry, but if you drive them away, you drive them away. Like the hottest room I've ever been in at a wrestling show was when Slex took the MCW title from Gino in Thornbury. Jen and Gambino had a great run as a heel, and I've never seen like fuck. I called that match, and it was incredible. I've never felt that kind of heat in a room. They fucking hated Gino. But I suspect if he'd wandered out into the crowd afterwards, or if he'd gone out into the crowd afterwards, people would have said, that was rad, thanks, and thanked him for the match. No one, unless they're like, you know, mentally deficient or irrational, I don't think anyone in the crowd genuinely hoped something terrible would befall Gino. But as a character, they were on board for him to fucking get his that night. And he did. And I heard the crowd chanting, fuck you, Gino, during his Kamina Burana operatic entrance and stuff like that, and they were wild for it, but it was still, everyone in the room was in on it and stuff, and that's kind of where we're at now. It's, you know, you can be a great heel and get people in on the shit and stuff, and like I was saying at the start, people want to invest, they want to buy in, they want to suspend their disbelief. If you give them a good reason to, they will. They've paid good money to get on board with whatever the fuck we're selling. And that was like the best example I've ever seen on the local scene of a hot room and people being there to see the heel get his, but also it was all a work. And that's sort of, you know, a testament to the skills of everyone involved, from the two performers to the bookers and the creatives and everything that had sort of gone into that. Yeah.
What do you think of performers that don't break kayfabe? Like if they're even at like after the show, meet and greet. Like if a fan sees them, if they're a heel, they're still a dick. Like, do you feel like that can still be done and like people can still do that in this day and age, or do you think it's like more cringy when you see it?
I don't mind. I quite like doing it. The last time I really did it properly was when I was the evil president of PCW, which would have been about 2015. It was up until I was lost at sea for a year, and I was like the evil president while still wrestling there. And I like made a point of the audience never saw me not on. And traditionally, like pre me being worried about catching COVID from the filthy fans, I used to be real into getting in amongst the fans and stuff, and like working the merch desk on and stuff like that, and giving people a taste of performance anytime I saw them and stuff. But as heel evil president KrackerJak for PCW, I never went out to the foyer unless I was on. Like if I had to pass a message to someone, I'd come out in character and be all like, "What the hell is this? We need more chairs at the back." Blah 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 and stuff. And it made a difference. No one ever saw me not on. I snuck in and out of the building and shit, and they hated me for real. And it made a difference that it was quite a family show with a lot of kids and shit.
Yeah.
But we did some of my favorite stuff happened at PCW in that run as a heel. Especially I was having so much issues with my neck and I knew I was going to have to take some time off soon. And, credit to Steve Pull and Rowdy, who, was running PCW. He really gave me a lot to work with and created a lot of really fun opportunities where the crowd could hate me for real. And we had real fun with it and stuff like that. So yeah, absolutely. I think you can do that. I think that's quite fun. I mean, we're all there to play along and make believe anyway. I think it's a bit different. Like if a fan comes up to me and they're like a grown ass adult and they're like, "Oh, I really like what you did there. It kind of reminded me of a match I saw years ago on TV and stuff." I'm not going to talk to them like it's real. Right? When I do that, because it's a bit. I'm just insulting their intelligence at that stage. And stuff like that. I don't mind engaging with fans who kind of have that sort of input. I'm really curious when they're like, "Oh, it kind of reminded me of a show I saw at Festival Hall 25 years ago." I love to hear that shit. So I think, you don't want to kayfabe someone right to their fucking face when they're red on it and stuff. That said, I love responding to Twitter threads as if wrestling's real. That's so satisfying. Someone's like, "This is, Ambrose, he bleeds every time he wrestles. What the fuck?" I'm like, "Why are you angry at him? Be angry at the guy who busted him open. He's just trying to win," shit like that. And the best thing is they're like, "Oh, and they know what I'm doing and stuff, but there's no real comeback to that because we all know the work and stuff like that, so you can't really counter it. I find that immensely satisfying. Like
Your Twitter game is on fire, by the way.
Yeah, there's enough real life in our lives. I think anytime we can kind of extend the game out a bit, I think that's really rewarding. You don't want to treat people like chumps or jabronis or stuff like that, but I do think that, that like, if any of us wanted to be real fucking fighters, we'd be real fucking fighters. That's what Gore did. He came across to the work shit from real fighting because it's more fun. Stuff. And so, it's fun to kind of play around in that space too. There's room to operate between playing along and insulting people's intelligence.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. But it is to that time. Oh, 60 seconds with Piers. How this works is we're going to fire a bunch of questions at KrackerJak. He's got 60 seconds to answer as many as he can. You ready to get this ball rolling?
Yeah, bring it on.
All right, we'll start it off in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Favorite song to sing at karaoke?
I Want to Know What Love Is by Foreigner.
Best subject at school?
Drama.
Ravioli or tortellini?
Ravioli? I'd say gnocchi if it was on the table, but ravioli, sure.
Why not? What is your go-to party trick?
Pissing into a cup while it's balanced on the top of my head.
Well done. What is the shittest gift you ever received?
I don't know if I've ever received it, but I'd say the old Lynx deodorant service station package. That's pretty thoughtless. Yeah, I'll go with that.
Would you rather win $10 million or live for twice as long?
Live for twice as long.
Name 5 things in front of you right now.
I've got my glass of Dimple Scotch. I've got this rock that a very dear friend carved Hup into. I have a snow globe. Brother Gore brought me back from Japan with Godzilla in it. I have my very handsome diary that I write all my bookings down. Look, it's got zebras on it. I really like that. And I have, I've got to have something here. Here's something. I've got a book given to me by a very dear protege of mine when they knew I was struggling with getting fucked over by the scene, and it sort of came through at a time that gave me great support and deeply appreciative of it.
Awesome. Next up, what was the first concert you ever attended?
I saw Pantera supported by Biohazard and Shihad in 1995.
That is fucking awesome. You're the lead singer of a band and get to tour with them for 6 months. Which band do you choose?
Mr. Bungle.
You're auditioning for Australian Idol. Which is your song that you sing?
Treat Me Like a Slut by Kim Petras.
In 5 minutes' time, you are being shipped to outer space. What 2 personal belongings do you take with you, excluding human beings?
Excluding human beings, I would take my entire collection of action figures and my supercomputer.
There you go. That has been 60 Seconds with Piers, with KrackerJak. But, you know it's been a good episode when you can sit there and it's been an hour and 20 minutes and the time's just flown by. Honestly, you're one of the most enjoyable people that I've had on the show. It's always great to have you on. An amazing conversation. Where can everyone find you on social media, support you, and get some merch as well?
I actually have to get back on the merch. I was so concentrating on being able to physically wrestle and deliver and not let down my opponents that I haven't even considered merch. So Brother Gore and I are working on new Bastard Brothers merch. I'm going to dust off some merch of my own. You can catch me on the Instagrams and the Facebooks and the Twitters. It's all /KrackerJak, KrackerJak, because I spelt it stupidly 22 years ago and I'm paying for it ever since.
There you go, guys. Make sure you go and support KrackerJak.
Oh my God, go to my fucking YouTube. No one follows my YouTube. It's just archives of the weirdest, oddest shit I've done for 20 years. Go to my YouTube as well. Search for KrackerJak. Subscribe. It'll be very validating to me.
Go and subscribe to KrackerJak on YouTube, guys. Also, huge shout out to our sponsor, healthvape.com and sleeps.com. Use those promo codes MWAPod to get a 10% discount at checkout. Also, tune in tomorrow night. I'm sitting down with Newey Pros Ben Braxton. Make sure you tune in for that one. But, guys, until next time, we'll see you soon. Take care. All the best. Peace.